Hello and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, January 28th, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. My guest is James Manrique. Recordings of this series of programs and links to the articles we refer to today can be found on the Facebook page for Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. Comments on this program are welcome. Email us at carl@newsfromneptune.com. Carl is C-A-R-L. Our program concentrates on the news of U.S. war making, which is generally not reported, not by accident, in the U.S. media. Since 1945, the United States government has killed over 20 million people in wars in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, Latin America, and elsewhere, designed to maintain the worldwide economic hegemony that the U.S. inherited as the only largely undamaged major country in World War II. Russia lost some 27 million people in defeating Nazism. The U.S. lost 500,000 in World War II as a whole. The cost of the global war on terror since 2001 has recently been estimated at $6.4 trillion and 801,000 lives. Most would agree that at least this last is an underestimate. Since 9/11-2001, the United States has appropriated and is obliged to spend $6.4 trillion on counterterrorism efforts through the end of this year. An estimated $5.4 trillion of that total has funded and will continue to fund wars and military operations in more than 80 countries around the world. An additional minimum of $1 trillion will provide care for veterans of those wars, American veterans of those wars, through the next several decades. If you count all parts of the federal budget that are military related, including the nuclear weapons budget, it makes up 2/3 of the U.S. federal budget, and it's inching towards 3/4. We're distracted for more news this week by the impeachment nonsense, but of course that is the political establishment's purpose. Trump should be impeached immediately for recent war crimes he committed, notably the assassination of a foreign leader, for whatever motive, and not for he should be impeached for whatever motive, and not for the, let me see if I can say that again. That's the reason Trump should be impeached, not for the nonsense in the House resolutions, which are based on his hesitation to provide weapons to kill Ukrainians. His predecessors had few hesitations on such matters, although in fact Obama did hold up weapons from the Nazi-infested Ukrainian government that his administration had established for a little while. So a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. Incidentally, Jill Stein, whom I voted for, by the way, in the last presidential election, is one of the few, she was the Green Party nominee, is one of the few U.S. politicians, even within the Green Party, by the way, who said anything sensible about this presidential murder of a foreign general. Now, this is grounds for impeachment, she said. Treachery unleashing the unthinkable for Americans and people the world over. Trump asked the Iraqi prime minister to mediate with Iran and then assassinated General Soleimani on a mediation mission. This is recognized perhaps more clearly in the rest of the world than it is in this country. As a result, the Iraq parliament and the prime minister say the U.S. troops should leave Iraq. The prime minister says Donald Trump called him to ask him to mediate with Iran and then ordered a drone strike on Soleimani. He says Soleimani was carrying a response to the Saudi initiative to diffuse tension when he was assassinated by the U.S. drone. And there's good indications that this was a result of machinations within the American government and not necessarily a settled policy of the government as a whole. See John Bolton. By the way, remember that Martin Luther King, whose day we recently celebrated, in addition to being a heroic civil rights leader, was an anti-war socialist. We honor his memory by remembering what he said, notably about our government being the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, and about the need for a universal basic income, matters that have come back into the political discussion since King's murder. He made some elementary points on this matter, that poor people were poor because they didn't have money, and that homeless people were homeless because they didn't have homes. And it was up to the society to provide these things for our fellow citizens. We can't claim we can't afford it. James, I want you to say a word, if you can, about the demonstration last Saturday in which you spoke for AWARE. And actually, I'll lead into that, if you don't mind, with a piece from Danny Shurjan, a retired military officer, taught at West Point and has been writing well about American military activities recently. Why don't you...
Yeah, so the demonstration this last Saturday, there was a good number of people there. There was maybe 20, 30 people. It was led by the Answer Coalition. There's a local Answer Coalition. It was part of the national or global Answer anti-war rally on this last Saturday. I spoke briefly at it. It was pretty cold, but there was a lot of good speakers there, and they marched and they had signs. And as with any anti-war rally, we always get a tremendously positive response from the citizens. There's always some people that are pro-war or whatever, but anytime you do these rallies, it's always rewarding to see how many people are anti-war. That overall the sentiment is anti-war, and so yeah, I mean the rally went well, and I think they're circulating petitions now to try to do some additional action in addition to just rallying and carrying signs. We're also circulating petitions, and just to show that there are a bunch of citizens in Champaign County that oppose war.
And you spoke up for AWARE in that.
I spoke up briefly because AWARE does monthly demonstrations.
Right.
We have another monthly demonstration coming up this Saturday, 2 to 4 at the corner of Church and Neal. And we've recently combined forces, AWARE and Answer, because Answer has a little bit more people power at the moment. So
everybody in AWARE is getting old. That's the problem.
Yeah, it happens.
AWARE was founded 20 years ago.
Yeah,
the invasion
and the war is still going.
Yeah, exactly.
So, to try to breathe some new energy into the AWARE movement and the efforts that we've been doing for the last 20 years, we've been working with Answer and PSL, the People's Socialist Liberation, to do a combined effort. So next Saturday we're doing the demonstration. That's the monthly demo. And then Answer will do a teach-in a week after that. It will be, again, on Saturday. I think it's going to be at 1 p.m. at the IMC. You can check Answer's page to get the exact details, but it's going to be Saturday afternoon at the IMC. And they had one of these this last month, and it was very informative. Answer, or Peter with Answer, he has gotten a hold of a spreadsheet with all of the contracts, the military contracts in town. And just one, so with these spreadsheets, there's a lot of different divisions of the military. And usually when you get one of these spreadsheets, it's just one division, one type of set of contracts. So even with just the contracts in the spreadsheet that we got, there's a tremendous amount of money being poured into Champaign County for war contracts. Obviously, a lot of it goes into technology fields because we have a lot of tech in this town. There's a good chunk of the money that goes to the university. I think almost a third of the money is going to various university programs.
I was actually surprised that 2/3 of it wasn't going to the university.
Yeah,
so but it's a good point.
I mean, there's a lot of private companies make money off of the military. I mean, that's it's just one of the biggest, easiest ways to make money as a private tech company is to make war equipment and make things that can help soldiers and Yeah, so the teach-in, we were able to learn about some of these different companies in town that, like the ones that get the biggest contracts, that sort of thing. So there's going to be another teach-in the week after the demonstration where we're going to go over some more of that. And it's also a bit of a strategizing session because it's a good time to get people together in the same room and talk about local strategy to try to, locally what we can do to oppose the war or just to oppose all this military action.
That's very worthwhile. I'm also happy to say that these teach-ins are being recorded for broadcast here at UPTV, I think. I don't know whether they did the last one or not, but
Yeah,
I know there were plans to do that.
I'm not sure if there was a camera at the last one, but that would be a very good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that the rallies have been videotaped. I think the rally this last Saturday was taped.
Excellent.
I'm not sure if that's going to be circulated on UPTV or just Facebook, but there's definitely a video out there of the speeches from that.
Many of these things show up on YouTube as well, so
exactly.
Look around for them, and we'll try to publicize them when we can.
There was also a good rally on Sunday. There was the Women's March, the 2020 Women's March. That was organized by students at the U of I. There was a lot of good speakers there, but I was really impressed with, there was a couple anti-war speakers that also got to talk about like class struggle and how war affects women in Middle Eastern countries. There was actually a Palestinian that was talking about the suffering of Palestinians, female Palestinians, and all that. So I was glad to see that that was connected to, because war is kind of an all-encompassing issue. I mean,
yes,
I don't know. There's a lot of bad issues in this world, but war is just, I don't know.
It's the one thing that our government is doing with aplomb, regardless of who happens to be in the White House or in the Congress, and that's unfortunate. But there are things that can be done, and the first thing that can be done is to let Americans know about what's going on in this area, which for a variety of reasons, mainstream media doesn't want to tell us too much about. While you were doing the demonstration here last Saturday, there were similar demonstrations on the 25th. There were similar demonstrations going on around the country, and here's an account of one of them that comes, as I say, from Major Danny Sherjan on the anti-war website. This is, he calls his account the impeachment show, asking all the wrong questions on Ukraine. This was his account for the anti-war rally on the 25th. Apathy and misplaced priorities, the twin diseases of this generation. Sherjan, who is substantially younger than I am, is here talking particularly not about his generation, but about the next one. I spent this past Saturday, he says, speaking through a bullhorn in opposition to war, or at least opposition to escalating the existing state of war with Iran, during a local rally as part of the International Day of Action on the subject. Street protests to me are always equal parts inspirational and disappointing. Even here in the People's Republic of Lawrence, Kansas, that's where he was for the demonstration, a progressive island in a sea of reactionary militarist red, only about 40 folks showed up. Most were older hippie types, though there was sprinkling of 20-something socialist and intersectional justice activists were visible in the crowd, as you described the crowd here.
I think our crowd was a bit of a reverse to that arc. I mean, we definitely had the older hippies. There's always those in the anti-war movement, but I would say that it was probably 80% students, maybe 20%, old folk.
You were more fortunate in that regard than Major Sherjan thinks he was.
Right.
He says the one notably absent demographic in the largest university town in Kansas was students. It was, frankly, an embarrassment to the storied University of Kansas as an institution. What a far cry, a shameful fall from grace, for a college and city that was a veritable war zone in the aftermath of President Nixon's Cambodia invasion and the killing of 4 students at Kent State University. I remember that quite vividly, as I was at the University of Notre Dame in those days. I just started teaching there, and the night of the murder of the students by the National Guard at Kent State lives in my memory rather vividly. Hundreds, then thousands, protested. The Student Union building, he's talking about Kansas University now, the Student Union building was burnt, gunfire exchanged with the police, the National Guard called in, and the entire city placed under curfew for a few days. This wasn't just in Lawrence. Something similar happened where I was and other universities around the country. Indeed, Little Lawrence was for years a flashpoint city in the anti-Vietnam War movement. These days, as I flippantly mentioned in my speech, a generation of some 30,000 KU students can hardly fathom looking up from their iPhones long enough to consider a boots-on-the-ground rally in the physical company of other human beings. Not that the KU student body isn't, at least vapidly, his word, political. These kids are passionately concerned, at least in the medium of sidewalk chalk art and Snapchat activism, with two major issues: identity, race, gender, sexuality, politics, and of course reflexive anti-Trumpism. These are on some level important subjects. Nevertheless, any serious grasp of U.S. foreign policy and inherent American militarist imperialism seems distressingly absent. As such, I'd argue that this Kansan microcosm of higher education exposed youths reflects a general societal disease of misplaced priorities, especially when the Donald is involved. Nearly every vaguely liberal, generally affluent KU student one meets is genuinely obsessed with Trump, his racism, temperament, and especially the apparent necessity of his impeachment and removal. If only they, along it must be said with the mainstream left-leaning media and Democratic Party establishment, could cogently articulate just why this president deserves as much. Which brings me back to Saturday's rally. Halfway through my 12-minute keynote rant, a woman, though undoubtedly meaning well, legitimately cut me off and bellowed, "Impeach him already!" Odd, this, I reckoned, as I invariably lost my chain of thought. Trump wasn't the core theme of my speech, which focused more on the value of dissent and long-term folly of the U.S.-Iranian policy, and I was quite certain that I hadn't uttered the words Ukraine, Biden, or the phrase quid pro quo. My response was mercifully rapid and generally polite. Sure, I countered, impeach him, but for the right reasons. For enabling the terror bombing of Yemen, illegally assassinating a top leader of a sovereign nation, or escalating the unsanctioned chaos of American regional warfare. With that, the subject faded, and I pivoted back to the planned script in my head. Nonetheless, the woman's outburst, along with a multiplicity of impeach him signs in the crowd, one read, impeach the MF already, was instructive. To wit, any rational observer, do such Americans still exist, masochistic enough to have watched the last couple of weeks of wall-to-wall Ukraine gate, impeachment charade cable news coverage, must conclude that Trump's show trial has perhaps ineluctably distracted the American people. Only a misdirected reality TV-style immersion of this caliber seems capable of elbowing the real scandals and crises of our times, the Afghanistan papers, egregious Soleimani assassination, and no end in sight ongoing American forever wars, straight out of the headlines. What's more, lost in the impeachment fiasco and in the collective understanding of KU students, MSNBC talking heads, and Democratic lawmakers alike, is any concern, debate, critique, or even tough questions about the other potentially nuclear calamity of the day, America's aggressive, reckless Russia policy. Specifically, how U.S. actions in Ukraine, under Trump, Obama, and other post-fall of the Berlin Wall presidents, have foolishly stoked a new, equally dangerous and highly unnecessary Cold War with Moscow. Why, a wildly discomfiting few dare to ask, was Washington considering arming a deeply problematic Ukrainian regime for a proxy war with Russia waged several thousands of miles from America's shores? Is this prudent policy? What's the next step? What follows? And how does this end? These strike this author, at least, as vital queries. Only don't expect to hear any semblance of such sensible discussion, not on America's campuses, corporate cable channels, we're an exception, or Capitol Hill. What with that disconcerting state of public affairs established then, allow me to poke just a few should-be obvious holes in Washington's Ukraine policy and the bipartisan, but these days mostly Democratic, congressionally provocative Russia agenda and narrative. First of all, it was two American presidents, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who first provoked Moscow by expanding NATO's inherently anti-Russian alliance, in contravention to promises made by the latter president's daddy, right up into the heart of the old Soviet republics and sphere of influence. It was the U.S., its State Department and intelligence services, that helped stoke the democratic revolution, and that's in inverted commas because, of course, it was a coup, that overthrew a duly elected, Russia-friendly president in Ukraine. This is the Obama administration's policy in Ukraine that resulted in the establishment of the first government in Europe since the Second World War to have explicit Nazis in it. It's Washington that props up the current, questionably legitimate Ukrainian regime, which alarmingly includes factions that are patently white supremacist and neo-Nazi. Finally, it's America which, along with Russia, has chosen bellicosity over diplomacy by seeking to provide one side in the proxy war with inevitably escalatory lethal arms. This is the defense materials that Trump is charged with withholding, as, in fact, the Obama administration withheld them for a while, too. Seemingly oblivious to this inconvenient political context and these salient demonstrable facts, just this past Friday, the absurdist ringleader of the misdirected impeachment distraction, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, had the gall to announce that Trump's alleged Ukrainian interference conspiracy theory, and presumably the whole ongoing Eastern European conflagration, was, quote, brought to you by the Kremlin, close quote. Well, call me a pro-Russia Putin apologist, but my read on the uncomfortable facts surveyed above suggests a wholly different take. The dangerous proxy war in Ukraine and burgeoning Cold War with nuke-saturated Russia was largely brought to you by the White House. This is Danny Surgeon, in his retired military officer, in his statement at last Saturday's no war with Iran demonstration, his at the University of Kansas. Do you hear anything similar here at the local demonstration?
I think our anti-war rally was a lot better because it was much more heavily student-focused. It was led by a graduate student, so its university connections were a lot deeper. And then, like I said, too, the rally at the university, they actually brought up, the anti-war stuff there. So I think our student population, luckily, is a lot more tuned into it than out there in Kansas. I don't know if Kansas is more conservative, but. I have realized that Champaign-Urbana is very liberal for the rest of the surrounding area that we're in. I mean, we're surrounded by a lot of very conservative cornfields. But yeah, so the anti-war rally Saturday, I think, was a lot better directed than just what is mentioned in the article there. I mean, definitely there were people that were anti-Trump, and it's a good distinction to make. That. Trump is not the one that just originated war. He didn't,
exactly.
Come along and be like, oh, war is a great idea. He's just one of many that figured out that you can profit off of it. And
I've argued for a while that the anti-Trumpism is not, how shall we say it, an innocent mistake of for what the problem is. That the real objection to Trump, and we've had some other indications of that this week, from the permanent government, we might say, the establishment, the political establishment in Washington. The real objection to Trump has always been that he threatened not to keep up the wars and war provocations that the American political establishment has long thought was necessary to retard the economic development of Eurasia, particularly the Russia-China alliance, and because that was seen as a detriment to the profits of the 1%, the 1% ability to use its worldwide economic hegemony to its own advantage.
Right.
When Trump comes into office on the basis of a campaign in which he was the first major party political candidate in 40 years to attack the neoliberal and neoconservative policies of the previous government, of the previous administrations, the establishment worried. I mean, the American control of the world economy is based upon a notion that America is there to protect the world from enemies. And in fact, what it's doing is protecting the profits of the 1% from competitors.
Well, I think with Trump it's a complicated thing, because I think a lot of the, at least in my view, a lot of the reason that the establishment in general doesn't like Trump and wants to get him out of office is because Trump is like kind of exposing a lot of what goes on behind the scenes. A lot of the previous presidents, they would do all the war crimes and all that, but they would do it with a lot more charisma, whereas Trump just does it loud and bold and kind of exposes the behind the scenes stuff as it's happening. And I mean, he's still profiting off of it for himself, for his family, for anybody that supports him. He's trying to make as most profit as possible. In my own view, I've seen it more as a kind of a interpersonal battle with the oligarchs, because all these oligarchs are in it to make as much money as possible. It's kind of like a cartel operation.
Yes.
You know, if you have the cartel operating where everybody can agree, you can price fix better. But if you have one member of the cartel that goes rogue and starts getting all the stuff for themselves, obviously they're going to make a lot of profit, but that's going to be bad for the rest of the cartel. And I think that's happening right here with the oligarchs, with Trump and exposing everything that he does, because he's still willing to go to war. He's still willing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. I mean, he went on national TV and listed off all the prices of all the different weapons that we were selling them, all the different aircraft carriers and all that. So, I mean, he's proud to do all the war stuff that he can, as long as he profits and as long as he makes profit for his family and the people that are connected with him.
I think the threat that Trump represented to the political establishment was the criticism, not the action. In office, Trump has proved himself probably the weakest American president since Calvin Coolidge. I mean,
I think he probably went into it with just a one-term attitude where he wasn't planning to get reelected, and I think that he just wanted to go in, burn as many bridges as he could, make as much money as he could for himself and his family. Because, Trump is an old man. He probably doesn't have a lot of time left. And he knows that. I'm not saying, I'm sure that you got more years than Trump. I mean, Trump seems, he runs a million miles a second. But I'm sure that he did the calculations and he was like, it's going to be very, very difficult to ever get reelected, especially with the messages that he does and all that sort of stuff. So I think Trump saw himself as just a one-term person. He's just, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to get as much money as I possibly can for myself and my allies. I'm going to burn as many bridges as I can because it doesn't matter for me as long as I'm getting paid. And so he did the same tricks that all the other oligarchs did, and that's why the oligarchs are mad, is because he's exposing the whole charade of it in the process. He's exposing the corporate media. He came out recently and tweeted in favor of Bernie and stuff and that. So, he's constantly exposing the establishment for who they are and what they do, while at the same time profiting off of it.
I think the reflection should be less about Trump's own peculiar psychology, and you may be right in your speculations in that regard, but what seems to me is important is that he touched the Holy of Holies. He questioned the American political establishment's foreign policy, and which is bound up with the domestic policy. If you talk about globalism and American military hegemony.
And he also exposed the fact that the CIA is in on it too. That the CIA is one of the arms of the oligarchs that they use to control the situation. they use the CIA and they use all the different apparatuses of the American government to control, their monopoly of all these resources. And Trump has exposed the fact that the CIA and that secret intelligence and all that is used for political purposes, not just merely for the betterment of peace or whatever.
This is a note from a book that's about to be published. I think it's published this week or next, entitled "A Very Stable Genius: Donald J. Trump's Testing of America." Almost violates my notion that we shouldn't talk about his psychology so much as his politics or the actual politics.
He's just so good at distracting people because of that comment there, the very stable genius. He knew what he was saying when he said those words to generate as much press as possible, and he is a master at manipulation and press manipulation especially.
This is a notion, this is a section from that book that is about to be published. There's no more sacred room for military officers than 2E924 of the Pentagon, a windowless and secure vault where the Joint Chiefs of Staff meet regularly to wrestle with classified matters. Its more common name is the tank. This is a secure room in the Pentagon. The tank resembles a small corporate boardroom with a gleaming golden oak table, leather swivel armchairs, and other mid-century stylings. Inside its walls, flag officers observe a reverence and decorum for the wrenching decisions that have been made there. It's a shrine. Hanging prominently on one of the walls is The Peacemakers, a painting that depicts an 1865 Civil War strategy session with President Abraham Lincoln and his 3 service chiefs, Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, and Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter. 152 years after Lincoln hatched plans to preserve the Union, that's what he did, President Trump's advisors staged an intervention inside the tank to try to preserve the world order. And the world order is this American military domination. By that point, 6 months into his administration, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, Director of the National Economic Council Gary Cohn, and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had grown alarmed by gaping holes in Trump's knowledge of history, especially the key alliances forged following World War II. Trump had dismissed allies as worthless, cozied up to authoritarian regimes in Russia and elsewhere, and advocated withdrawing troops from strategic outposts and active theaters alike. This is the prose, the account there, and the assumptions are all part of the author of this book, A Very Stable Genius, about to be published. Now, the point of this is that the top figures in the administration and even more in the Pentagon were alarmed by Trump's announced departure from the military aggressiveness that had been standard for American administrations, at least since the fall of the Soviet Union. That was what occasioned this particular meeting. It was Trump's worldview, Trump's account, Trump's threats to dismantle the structure of forever wars that was upsetting the permanent government, the deep state, if you like, and this was the occasion for this meeting in the tank. Trump had organized his unorthodox worldview under the simplistic banner of America First, but Mattis, Tillerson, and Cohn, these major figures in the Trump administration, feared his proposals were rash, barely considered, and dangerous to America's superpower standing. They also felt that many of Trump's impulsive ideas stemmed from his lack of familiarity with U.S. history and even where countries were located. To have a useful discussion with him, the trio agreed they had to create a basic knowledge, a shared language. Once again, I think this is at best a one-sided account of what prompted this important meeting, and that was the notion, not so much that Trump didn't understand what was going on, but that he wasn't down with the program. He wasn't pressing for a continuation of the belligerent American approach to the rest of the world that had characterized all recent American administrations going back 40 years. He was off the reservation, and they had to bring him back on.
Well, exactly. He's not playing with the cartel. He's playing by his own rules, and he's playing outside the rules of the cartel, and that's why they want to, put a stop to that.
On July 20th, 2017, Mattis invited Trump to the tank for what he, Tillerson, and Cohn had carefully organized as a tailored tutorial. What happened inside the tank that day crystallized the commander-in-chief's berating, derisive, and dismissive manner, foreshadowing decisions such as the one earlier this month that brought the United States to the brink of war with Iran. The tank meeting was a turning point in Trump's presidency. Rather than to get him to appreciate America's traditional role in alliances, Trump began to tune out and eventually push away the experts who believed their duty was to protect the country by restraining his most dangerous impulses. This is just backwards. This was exactly the other way around. It was precisely the fact that Trump, during the campaign, had attacked the notions of the forever wars and so forth, and that the establishment, represented by these Pentagon and administration figures, were bound and determined to get him back on the same general line of belligerence towards Russia and China that's at the core of recent American foreign policy. But it ended up, the session ended up badly in the sense that Trump, in his bombastic manner, marched out as saying to the assembled generals and top administration figures in the room, and I quote, "You're a bunch of dopes and babies." He was not brought into the program as they wanted him to, but was in fact reached a high point of his criticism of what the American political establishment had been doing. That was a situation which the permanent government of the deep state remembered. They haven't forgot this meeting, and you can say that what's happened in American foreign policy since then has been the attempt of that foreign policy establishment, that deep state, to recover the sort of control that they'd had of previous administrations. That's the reason why it's important that they get Trump out. It's not just enough to beat him in the next election. The point is that he has to be removed because of this dangerous, erratic path that he seems to have announced. I can't help but feel that the murder of Soleimani, of the important Iranian general, was the result of the sort of pressure that grew out of this meeting, the pressure on Trump to come round to the neoconservative position, to come around to the position, the neoconservative position was also the position of the Obama administration on these matters, and maintain this warlike stance. The idea that Trump is the originator of belligerence in the Middle East is wrong. What happened was that Trump criticized it, and he criticized it in public. And the public responded to it, and these folks are in the business of getting back the arrangement in which war and rumors of war are part and parcel of American foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest points that that you keep reiterating on is that it's not just Trump that is responsible for the war. And I mean, we see that locally in who our local elected officials are, because all of our local officials have supported the war. Dick Durbin, Tammy Duckworth, Rodney Davis, they have all supported
Excellent points.
the war. So, it's not like Trump is the only one out there causing war. And so
absolutely not. And as I say, the problem is not the...
Exactly. We're on the same page on that. So it's just like people need to expand their viewpoints of the problems of the world start more than just... They don't stop and end at Trump. It's a lot further down ballot. And, I mean, people have choices on that. And that's why, local elections like the one that's coming up soon is so important, because these local elections determine who goes there and who gets to influence who gets to vote on those different choices.
And as you pointed out, I think, James, the election for Congress in this district actually opposes, apparently, candidates with different views on this subject, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two different elections for Congress. There's IL 15 for Shimkus's district because he's leaving.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually a bunch of Democrats running for that. I don't know. I mean, it's always a toss-up on if they can win that district because it's very conservative. But there's choices there. And then there's also choices in our own district of IL 13 because there's two different Democrats running. And one Democrat is very much establishment, has made their career out of establishment politics, and supports the war. They take the same stance that Tammy Duckworth took, where they do not oppose the war, they don't oppose the killing, they just oppose the manner in which it's being done.
Now you're talking about the Democratic candidate in Illinois 13, right?
Yes, yes. Well, the Democratic candidate Betsy shares the same opinion as Tammy Duckworth, which is not that war is wrong, not that killing is wrong, but it's just being done in the wrong way.
But she has an opponent who is anti-war, right?
This is correct. Betsy's opponent, Stephanie Smith, is opposed to the war, just flat out, regardless of whether or not it was voted by Congress or done by the president. Just the idea of war, we should do everything we can to avoid killing other people. And it's just, I don't know, it gets into philosophical stuff about killing is wrong except when we do it,
Oh, yeah. But these two will face each other in the Democratic primary, eh?
They will, and that will be an interesting election because it's going to be a low turnout election. But once again, it kind of mirrors a lot of things that we see on the national scene because Betsy is very much an establishment candidate. She has a tremendous amount of money behind her. She had millions of dollars put behind her in 2018. Because of those millions of dollars, she was able to build a tremendous support network. She continues to get support from the DCCC. She's
Democrat. You better spell that out literally.
Oh yeah, the DCCC.
Yes.
I don't.
Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Yeah,
is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
DCCC. Yes. The Democratic Party's support for local congressional candidates.
Yeah, and they're getting their finger into a primary election race. And I mean, this race, I don't want to say that it was decided before it happened, but I mean, there's just so much money, so much pre-built-in support. This mirrors the fact of big money in politics on a local level. How is a candidate that like Stephanie Smith supposed to compete against that? But I mean, the fact that it's a primary, there's still always opportunity because of the low voter turnout. Things can kind of go either way, and it's with ground movement, with being able to let people know that Stephanie is she's for the working people, she's not establishment. There's a choice there.
There's a choice, but of a Democratic candidate who would then, in a general election, oppose Rodney Davis, the incumbent, who is something less than anti-war, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. Politics is very interesting because it's this weird game of who is electable or who has the resources to get elected. Because then that's the other thing too is even if Stephanie were able to beat Betsy, then going into the one-on-one head election against Rodney Davis, she wouldn't have the resources that Betsy has. She wouldn't have the support of the DCCC. She wouldn't have had the millions of dollars in 2018. She wouldn't have had this whole built-in volunteer network. And get no thing wrong, I oppose Rodney Davis. I oppose all this war and all that. But it's just if we replace Rodney Davis with another candidate that is just only slightly more left than he was, is that really any better than what we had? I don't know.
No, I think it's an extremely good point. I did write Rodney this week. Though there are two matters in the House that will actually, beneath all the sound and fury about the impeachment stuff, will probably be voted on this week that have to do with delimiting America's participation in regional wars around the world. One, Representative Ro Khanna's bill on limiting Yemen, limiting support for the war in Yemen, and the other escapes me now. I'll post these on the Facebook page for where on the air. But they're worthwhile to send Rodney a note. he likes to hear from you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it won't make any difference in terms of how he votes, probably.
Oh, exactly.
But still in all, it's good to let him know we're out there.
Exactly. Anytime that I call my politicians like Rodney or anything like that, I just assume that they're not going to listen to me. But at least I can talk to their staffer.
Yep.
And maybe through time and effort and erosion, maybe I can convince their staffer that the person that they're working for is, not that honest or whatever. But like you say, it's kind of, an exercise of patience to, try to right Rodney on these issues. Because there was some poll that he did a few years back where he asked people, I think it was about Medicare for All, where he was asking people their opinions on it. And he only did it just to make a political point. And I don't even know if he tallies up the responses that he gets from people or even does any sort of consideration as to how he votes. He's pretty much a party man.
I lost the.
So yeah, I mean the election's coming up quick. There's only about 50 days left.
One more line on Rodney there and on the local election in this regard. But there are other local problems that are far less important, I think, than America at war, but that are disturbing local politicians. The treasurer of Champaign County and the state representative from this region are both in some difficulty. And
yeah, I mean, the treasurer is a lot more of a real situation than the state rep issue. I mean, the treasurer thing was, I don't know, that's all getting shaken out. But, I mean, if you listen to the opposition, it sounds like she didn't really do much for an entire year. And so that's going to have ramifications.
And well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. What ramifications will it have? Will it simply be necessary to find someone competent to do the job of treasurer, and then things will be restored to the
well, I mean, they definitely need
proper
somebody.
form?
They definitely need somebody competent there. A treasurer is one of those spots where it's actually like a job where you have to do effort, like unlike a state rep or a congressperson or something.
That's an interesting distinction, but I think you're right.
State reps and congresspeople, what is the effort they do? They show up for session X number of days out of the year and vote yes or no on things. Like that's the actual work and they can put forward bills, that sort of stuff. But they're only in session for however many days out of the year. Whereas the county treasurer actually has to do audits. They actually have to balance, like they have to make sure
collect some money. Yes,
they have to make sure the accounts line up at the end of the month. And with Champaign County, there's like over 60 different accounts and all these different balance sheets, and you have to balance all of that every single month. From what and I'm not super well versed on the situation with the treasurer, but from what I understand, she just didn't do it or messed it up, and so there's going to be like a huge backlog of getting all that fixed. So yeah, I mean, elections have consequences, and some offices actually have actual work that needs to be done. You were mentioning some of the hot water that the local state rep had gotten. That whole situation was illuminating, mainly because it emphasizes the tribalism or the party divide. There's so much tribalism in politics that just gets in the way of actual like issue type stuff, and it's just, for instance, on Facebook, there was a thread in the local, Spotted in Champaign-Urbana about the state rep and about the news of it, and everybody has their comments on it. But every comment that criticized her, immediately the first person to respond to that was the Democrat running for county recorder. He was the first one to respond to every single one of those comments. Most of the responses were like, "Oh, how dare you even question the state rep? You must be racist." Like, basically along those lines. And it's just like, I could only imagine what would have happened if the shoe was turned and Rodney Davis had been, caught in some small misappropriation or something. How much the Democrats would have jumped on that immediately and tried to be like, "Oh, well, this is, clearly Rodney at it again." And, so for them to, it's just so hypocritical, and to see, it play out in live, yeah, I don't know.
So you don't see it having more political significance than the problem, the trouble that Carol Ammons has got herself into has no more political significance than this question of, as you say, tribal alliances, eh?
I mean, it illustrates the tribal alliances. I mean, it will definitely be very interesting to see what the full story is once, more details come out about what happened with that incident, because, it could be very illuminating for the type of character of somebody that would do something like that. Not saying that they did it, but I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the full story. And that's the other thing too, because like a bunch of the supporters for her immediately come out and they're like, oh, you got to wait till all the facts come out, and you don't know the situation. And I lost my trail of thought.
Aware had an important meeting, I think, with Carol Ammons, the local representative from this district, when the legislature was debating an outrageous bill essentially to prevent support for, or to limit support for any attempts to boycott Israeli apartheid. There was a bill to prevent any state monies to be used to invest in companies which observed boycotts of Israel. That's outrageous on the face of it, but it passed overwhelmingly in the state legislature, in the Illinois legislature, and was signed by the then governor. And Carol Ammons was one of the few representatives in the legislature who didn't vote on the matter, but didn't vote against it either. And Aware as a group sat down with Carol and asked her to explain why it was that she hadn't voted against this outrageous measure. And the answer was, at first, well, no one asked me to. Well, perhaps not. Maybe we should have made a phone call beforehand.
Right.
But it's so obvious. And the whole thing slipped through the Illinois legislature without much notice. We did what we could, and that was obviously not enough to alert people of what was going on there. But it was a terrible falling off on the part of our state representative. If the issue had been South African apartheid a generation ago, there's no question that she would have voted against it.
Yeah.
But in Israel, apartheid is acceptable and indeed is supported by monies belonging to the state of Illinois. This is outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hot button issue, and I mean, to her credit, she is able to say, well, I didn't, vote in favor of apartheid or whatever, so she, but I mean, there's a lot of ways to criticize that, because, I mean, it's kind of, she votes like that on other issues, too. She did that with recreational marijuana, where instead of voting in favor of it, she voted present, so, and there's debate on whether or not present counts as no, or whether or not present, is anything more than a no with an asterisk. But, I mean, I don't know. On big, bold issues like this, like recreational marijuana, we would hope that Carol, somebody that's been unopposed her last two elections, could be more bold on these issues rather than being more of a centrist. On the, the Israel thing, she's more of a centrist. On the recreational marijuana, she's more of a centrist. She refused to ever co-sponsor any bill related to that, even though she talks about being in favor of it. She only put forward a bill once it was clear that a different bill was already going to get passed. I mean, it just plays into a pattern where she does whatever is most politically beneficial to her brand at that current point in moment, Is it more left to vote present than, no on that apartheid bill? Yeah, it's more left to do that, but it would have been even more left to just come out and oppose it.
Exactly.
Is it more left to vote present on the recreational marijuana than just straight up no? Yeah, it's more left than doing that, but she also didn't vote yes. She also never co-sponsored anything in the past. She also signed a Republican-backed pledge to delay the recreational marijuana, and she does all this while still getting praise from a large number of people in town.
We appreciate very much your observations on local politics here, James. Are there other items out of this we should mention? What else is on your list? We have a few minutes left for that.
I mean, So unfortunately, like her election's not contested, so you can't vote against Carol Amons. But there are many contested elections coming up for March.
What's the date in March for the primary?
The March primary is March 17th.
March 17th. That's right, St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, and so it's very important if you're a student or faculty or planning to go out of town for spring break, because
Very nice
spring
point.
break is going to be the exact same week as Election Day.
Think that occurred to anybody in
I
Springfield?
think it's just happenstance. I think
see.
they just have a calendar that they follow, and
But nobody's shedding tears that those students won't be able to vote, right?
well, I mean, to his credit, the county clerk is actually opening up a second polling location on campus.
Oh,
and
really?
The campus polling is going to have a whole additional week of early voting.
I hadn't heard that. So
yeah, I had just heard this a week or two ago. So, early voting on campus starts on March 2nd and will run up and through the election. There's going to be an unofficial election day of March 10th for campus, where they're going to try to promote that on campus of vote on unofficial, or make it a sort of day.
Unofficial has a certain ring to it here.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that works,
exactly.
yeah.
So they're going to see what they can do to kind of tie into that, tie into the St. Patrick's Day thing, and
Good.
maybe make it on an unofficial vote. So
That seems very clever. Whose idea was this? Do you know?
I think it was the universities for the unofficial, or the students, maybe like the Illinois student government. But I mean, I'm very glad to see that Aaron's opened up an additional week of early voting for the students and at a second location. So that will be fantastic.
Good.
Like I said, this election, there's a bunch of different things coming up. It's a primary, so you can only pick, you can only vote Republican or Democrat. You have to pick one of the ballots or the other. Republican, unfortunately, there's not very many contested elections. There's a contested election for U.S. Senate to oppose Dick Durbin. There's like 5 or 6 people running for that spot. Once again, this would highlight ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting could be making this election a lot better. So there is a very contested election for to oppose Dick Durbin. I'm not sure how strong any of those candidates will actually do in the real election, but nonetheless, that's something to vote on countywide. Also for Republicans, you have IL-15, the Shimkus district. There's a lot of contested Republicans in that race. And unfortunately, that's the only Republican races. And so to finish up the Democratic races, there's IL-13 for Betsy and Stephanie. There's IL-15 as well, has Democrats. There's 3 or 4 county board. There's county board 6, 8, 9, and 10. I guess that's 4 of them. The circuit judge is exceptionally important. Circuit judge, look into that race. Once again, ranked choice voting would help because there's 4 candidates. 2 of them are very strong, 2 of them are not. So what else? Circuit clerk. So on the Democrat side, there's a whole bunch to vote for. Republican just a little bit, but all of it's very meaningful. So
Thank you, Jim.
finish it up.
Appreciate it. You've been listening to Aware on the Air, produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Mystical Ethan Young. Thanks to him also, this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.